right, so I have some first notes on Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. Contrary to what you've heard, the uh, the book is actually a book about being a prince and not manipulating others in your relationships or whatever your particular reason for reading it is. It is about what it actually is. It's not very applicable. Okay, you'll get more out of reading The Art of War and trying to apply that to your life than you will something like Machiavelli because some of the principles that he elucidates are very general if you're going to apply them that way. All right, so one of the principles he talks about is where an enemy resides in person, it is difficult to oust him. So the concept here is that if you have an enemy prince that's ensconced in their own kingdom or their own capital territory, it's going to be difficult to oust them because that's their home territory as opposed to a distant colony or something that's being ruled as a satellite. So Machiavelli also wrote other books. One is a discourse on Livy, which I'm currently reading. So he does talk a lot in the work about the Roman Empire, and very like a lot of classical examples elucidate what he's saying, even though that had limited use because you can see when Machiavelli tried to form a Florentine Republican army that would break them away from using the condottieri, um, they were defeated. They were crushed. So he does say that Rome conquered the territory it did by being invited there. That is actually totally true. We can think of Caesar and the Aedui and the alliance he had with them that allowed him to move into Gaul and then claim that he was defending them against Ariovistus and the Helvetii, the Helvetians. Other examples would be being invited into the Hasmonean kingdom to settle their dynastic dispute or their civil war, leading to the conquest of Judea. Egypt, obviously Cleopatra would be an example when Egypt passed from a satellite of Rome to an actual territory. That would be an example. Greece, basically various leagues that were fighting among themselves would be another example. So what Machiavelli is saying when he brings that up is that outright aggression is not always great. You want a casus belli that makes you look somewhat innocent. In fact, the Romans would always claim, much like the United States does now, that their empire was a stochastic occurrence that simply happened. They didn't choose it. Of course, if you look at their actual policies, they definitely chose what to do. So he also counsels that men are to be kindly treated or utterly destroyed. Though he does criticize Caesar. He says Caesar was too liberal. His liberality would have destroyed the state had he lived, meaning he was too nice to his enemies. In fact, the very people that executed him or assassinated him were people he had pardoned. And that level of kindness was unheard of in Roman times because it was pretty customary that you would just butcher your enemies after you won a civil war. So another thing he says, now we all know his quote about being loved, or rather be hated than be loved. But another thing he says is a man may be feared and not hated. So a ruler can be respected in a sense, but be terrifying at the same time. A ruler must know how to follow evil courses if he must. It is human nature when the sea is calm not to think of storms. So basically, when things are tranquil, it's easy to become complacent. But what he's saying about following evil courses, of course, is he's peeling back the veil on political elites in his time. Because we all know, if you study the Middle Ages, that there's people that are calling themselves Christian kings, but they clearly weren't. So there's a lot of outrage towards the Italian Renaissance, particularly directed at the Italian Renaissance from Reformation types, okay, Martin Luther and whatnot, decrying the excesses of like the Borgia popes, but those rulers were no worse than anybody that was ruling in Northern Europe. So he also basically a huge portion of the prince is devoted to war. He also wrote An Art of War, which was used probably until like the 16th century by a lot of armies. So one of the things he says is war is never avoided, just postponed until your enemy has an advantage. So sometimes it's better to obviously strike first, preemptively. Ways of conquering a new territory, according to Machiavelli. So you can destroy it. You can just go in and just lay waste, right? You wreck the army, destroy the cities. Another way is to populate it with colonies. You put in some. So if you want a contemporary example, um, this would be China. So if China wants to conquer Xinjiang or Tibet, it just takes some of its excess population from the east with all that population density and just ships in the Han Chinese to the area and just depopulates the locals. Another way is to create a satellite. So United States foreign policy has been very good at creating satellites and doing it through covert means. So it's pretty effective. But that's just a synopsis of some of the ideas that were in The Prince by Machiavelli, and hopefully that's useful.